Have you ever noticed that even on the nights when your body finally gives in to exhaustion, something inside you remains awake, restless, searching, almost as if a deeper part of you refuses to settle for the life you have been living? There is a quiet discomfort that many carry into their sleep, a silent weight that does not disappear when the lights go off. It lingers beneath the surface, shaping not only the quality of your rest, but the way your life unfolds when you open your eyes again. And what if I told you that this hidden layer, the one you rarely question, might be the very place where your relationship with abundance is being written? Before we go any further, take a moment to ground yourself in this conversation. If something here resonates with you, allow yourself to stay present, to reflect deeply, and to truly listen. And if you feel called to explore this kind of understanding more often, take a second to engage with this space, because what you are about to discover is not about quick answers, but about a shift in awareness that unfolds over time. There is a common belief that prosperity is something you chase during the day, through effort, strategy, or even spiritual techniques repeated in moments of intention. But beneath that belief, there is a more subtle process taking place, one that unfolds when your conscious mind softens and your internal defenses begin to dissolve. In those quiet hours, when control loosens and identity becomes more fluid, your emotional patterns, your unspoken fears, and your deeply rooted expectations begin to organize themselves in a way that most people never notice. This is where the real question begins to take shape. When your body is still, when your thoughts lose their sharp edges, and when your usual sense of self fades into the background, what is actually guiding the direction of your life? What internal narrative continues to echo in that silent space? And more importantly, is that narrative aligned with the abundance you say you desire, or is it quietly reinforcing the very limitations you are trying to escape? The hidden emotional state you carry into sleep, there is a moment, often unnoticed, that happens just before sleep fully takes you. It is not marked by a clear thought or a conscious decision, but by a subtle emotional tone that settles into your body. Some nights it feels like quiet relief. Other nights it feels like a tension that never truly dissolves, even as your eyes close. That tone, almost invisible to the surface of awareness, becomes the final imprint your nervous system absorbs before entering a deeper state of reorganization. What most people overlook is that the body does not simply fall asleep, it transitions into a state where it begins to process, consolidate, and reinforce what was felt more than what was said. Throughout the day, it is possible to speak about abundance, to imagine different outcomes, to intellectually understand new possibilities. But as night approaches, what remains is not the language of intention, but the residue of lived emotion. If that residue is shaped by urgency, comparison, silent fear, or a sense of not being enough, the body carries that frequency into the very space where patterns become more deeply embedded. This is where the quiet contradiction begins to reveal itself. On the surface, there is a desire for expansion, for financial ease, for a life that feels open and supported. Beneath that surface, there may still be a subtle contraction, a constant anticipation of lack, a background tension that expects things to go wrong or to fall short. When these two layers coexist, the conscious mind may feel motivated, but the deeper system remains guarded, protective, and unable to relax into a sense of receiving. Sleep, in this context, is not a neutral state. It becomes a continuation of the emotional environment that was cultivated while awake. The difference is that during sleep, the analytical mind loosens its grip, and what remains active is the emotional and physiological imprint that has been rehearsed, often unconsciously, over time. The body does not question whether this imprint serves or limits you, it simply reinforces it, deepening the familiarity of that internal state. There is something almost paradoxical about this process. The more someone tries to mentally control outcomes during the day, the more likely they are to carry a sense of tension into the night. And that tension, rather than dissolving, becomes the very atmosphere in which the deeper layers of identity reorganize themselves. It is not the effort itself that creates resistance, but the emotional charge beneath it, the subtle feeling of needing something to happen in order to feel safe, complete, or at peace. This is why many people wake up feeling as though nothing has shifted, even after periods of strong intention or disciplined focus. The surface actions may have changed, but the internal baseline remains the same. And that baseline is not defined by what is consciously desired, but by what is repeatedly felt, especially in the moments when control fades and the system returns to its default state. Imagine the soil of a field that is being prepared for growth. During the day, seeds are chosen carefully, plans are made, and intentions are set. But if the soil itself remains dry, compacted, or resistant, those seeds struggle to take root. The night, in this analogy, is when the soil either softens or hardens further. It is where the conditions for growth are either nurtured or quietly restricted. In this sense, what you carry into sleep is not just a reflection of your day, it is a rehearsal of the reality your system is becoming familiar with. And familiarity, more than desire, is what the human system tends to recreate. When the body becomes accustomed to a certain emotional tone, even if that tone is limiting, it begins to interpret it as safe, predictable, and therefore preferable. What unfolds from this understanding is not a need for force or correction, but a deeper awareness of the emotional environment that surrounds the transition into sleep, because within that environment lies a silent, ongoing process, one that shapes not only how you rest, but how you continue to relate to abundance, possibility, and the unseen currents that move through your life. The silent conflict between desire and emotional memory, beneath every intention to change, there is a quieter layer that rarely announces itself, yet exerts a profound influence over what becomes possible. It is not the voice that declares goals or imagines new outcomes, but the emotional memory that has been accumulated over time, often shaped by experiences that were never fully processed or understood. This memory does not operate through logic or language, it moves through sensation, through the body's instinctive responses, through the subtle expectations that form without conscious permission. It is within this layer that a silent conflict often begins to take shape. On one side, there is the conscious desire for expansion, for financial ease, for a life that feels supported rather than strained. On the other side, there is an emotional imprint that may still associate growth with risk, visibility with judgment, and abundance with the possibility of loss. These associations are rarely deliberate. They are formed in moments of vulnerability, in experiences where safety felt uncertain, where outcomes did not match effort, where trust was quietly broken. When night arrives and the external world begins to fade, this conflict does not disappear. Instead, it becomes more pronounced in subtle ways. The body, no longer occupied with the demands of the day, begins to settle into its deeper patterns. If those patterns are shaped by unresolved tension, the system does not fully relax, even in sleep. There may be a sense of rest, but not restoration. There may be stillness, but not ease. And beneath that surface, the same emotional memory continues to echo, reinforcing the familiar state. This is where many misunderstand the nature of transformation. It is often believed that clarity of intention is enough to redirect one's life. But intention, when disconnected from emotional coherence, can create a kind of internal friction. The mind moves in one direction, while the body remains anchored in another. Over time, this misalignment does not simply delay progress, it creates a subtle form of exhaustion, a feeling of trying without arriving, of moving without truly shifting. There is also a deeper layer to this conflict, one that touches on identity itself. Emotional memory is not only about past experiences, it becomes the framework through which a person understands what is possible for them. If someone has repeatedly felt overlooked, unsupported, or constrained, those experiences can crystallize into an internal narrative that operates beneath awareness. Even when new opportunities appear, the system may respond with hesitation, not because the opportunity lacks value, but because it does not align with what feels familiar. During sleep, this framework is not questioned, it is reinforced. The mind, in its softened state, revisits fragments of experience, reorganizes impressions, and integrates emotional tones into a more stable pattern. This process is not inherently limiting, but it becomes so when the underlying emotional material remains unchanged. In that case, the same patterns are rehearsed again and again, not through conscious repetition, but through the body's preference for what it already knows. There is a certain quiet intelligence in this preference. The human system is designed to prioritize familiarity over possibility, not because it resists growth, but because it seeks stability. What is known, even if it is restrictive, feels safer than what is unknown, even if it holds potential. This is why the idea of abundance can feel both attractive and unsettling at the same time. It invites expansion, but it also challenges the boundaries that have been unconsciously maintained. Imagine a structure that has been built over many years, layer by layer, each experience adding to its foundation. To introduce something new is not simply to place it on top, but to alter the very structure itself. This requires a level of internal reorganization that goes beyond thought. It involves a shift in how the body interprets safety, how it relates to uncertainty, how it allows itself to move beyond what has been previously defined. What becomes evident in this process is that the space of sleep is not passive. It is an active field where emotional memory and emerging desire meet, interact, and either harmonize or remain in tension. And in that interaction, something subtle yet powerful is continuously shaping the direction of one's life. The subtle reorganization that happens when control fades. There is a point in the night where the need to control begins to loosen its grip, not because it has been resolved, but because the body no longer has the energy to sustain it. In that transition, something deeply revealing begins to occur. The structures that hold together identity during the day, roles, responsibilities, expectations, start to dissolve into a quieter, less defined state. It is within this dissolution that the system reorganizes itself, not according to what is consciously intended, but according to what has been most consistently felt. Control, in its essence, is not only about directing outcomes. It is a response to uncertainty, a way of maintaining a sense of safety in a world that often feels unpredictable. Throughout the day, it appears in subtle forms: the need to anticipate what comes next, the effort to avoid mistakes, the constant evaluation of whether enough is being done. These patterns become so normalized that they are rarely questioned. Yet, when the body enters the state of sleep, the capacity to maintain that level of vigilance diminishes, and what remains is the underlying emotional tone that gave rise to the need for control in the first place. This is where the night becomes a mirror of the internal landscape. Without the distractions of external activity, the system reveals its default orientation. If that orientation has been shaped by tension, by a quiet sense of insufficiency, by the belief that something must always be managed or secured, then the reorganization that takes place during sleep reflects those conditions. It does not introduce something new by force, it amplifies what is already present. What is often misunderstood is that this process is not rigid or fixed. The human system is constantly adapting, constantly integrating new information, constantly adjusting its internal models of reality. But adaptation requires a certain level of openness, a willingness of the body to experience a different state without immediately interpreting it as a threat. When control dominates the internal environment, that openness is limited. The system remains in a mode of protection, even in moments that could allow for expansion. There is a subtle distinction between relaxation and release. Relaxation can occur at the level of the body: muscles soften, breathing slows, physical tension decreases. But release involves something deeper. It is the moment when the system no longer clings to a particular expectation, when it allows itself to exist without the constant need to predict or manage. During sleep, relaxation is common, but release is not always present. And without release, the deeper layers of reorganization continue to operate within the same boundaries that were established during waking hours. This has a direct influence on how possibility is perceived. When the system is organized around control, new opportunities are often filtered through a lens of caution. The mind may recognize potential, but the body responds with hesitation. This hesitation is not a flaw, it is a reflection of the internal environment. It signals that, at a deeper level, the conditions for expansion have not yet been fully integrated. Imagine a river that has been flowing within a narrow path for years. The water follows the same direction, not because it is incapable of moving elsewhere, but because the terrain has shaped its course. For the river to expand beyond that path, the terrain itself must shift. In the same way, the patterns that guide perception, behavior, and response are shaped by repeated emotional experiences. During sleep, the terrain is not rebuilt from scratch, but it is softened, adjusted, and gradually reformed based on what the system allows. There is a quiet intelligence in this process, one that does not respond to urgency or force. It responds to consistency, to the repetition of a different internal state, to the gradual introduction of coherence where there was once tension. As control fades, even briefly, the possibility of a different organization begins to emerge, not as a sudden transformation, but as a subtle shift in how the system relates to itself and to the world around it. In this space where effort gives way to a more fluid state, the foundations of perception begin to change, and with that change, the way life is experienced, interpreted, and engaged with starts to move in a new direction, one that is less constrained by the need to manage and more open to the unfolding of what has not yet been fully known. The quiet emergence of a different internal reality. There are moments, subtle and almost imperceptible, when something within begins to shift without any visible effort. It does not announce itself with clarity or certainty, and it rarely follows the dramatic narrative that many expect from transformation. Instead, it emerges quietly, like a change in the air that can be felt before it is understood. This shift does not begin in the external world, it begins in the way the internal landscape reorganizes itself when resistance no longer defines its boundaries. During sleep, especially in those deeper phases where identity loosens its grip, the system is not actively trying to solve problems or achieve goals. It is entering a state where it can recalibrate its relationship with experience. What was once perceived as pressure may soften into neutrality. What was once associated with fear may lose some of its intensity. These changes are not immediate, nor are they always conscious, but they begin to alter the way the individual meets reality when waking returns. There is a tendency to look for evidence of change in visible outcomes, financial shifts, new opportunities, external validation. Yet the more foundational movement happens before any of that becomes apparent. It occurs in the way the body responds to the idea of expansion. A situation that once triggered contraction may now be met with a slightly wider space of tolerance. A possibility that once felt distant or unrealistic may now feel less threatening, even if it is not fully embraced. These are subtle indicators, but they reflect a deeper reorganization taking place beneath the surface. What allows this shift to unfold is not force, but coherence. When the internal state begins to stabilize in a way that is less fragmented, less divided between desire and resistance, the system starts to operate with a different kind of clarity. This clarity is not about knowing exactly what will happen, but about feeling less compelled to defend against what might happen. It is a movement away from constant anticipation toward a quieter form of presence. In this space, the perception of time itself can begin to change. The urgency that once dominated the experience, the sense that something must happen quickly in order to restore balance, starts to lose its intensity. Instead, there is a gradual recognition that what is unfolding does not need to be forced into a specific timeline. This does not lead to passivity, but to a different relationship with action. Action becomes less about compensating for an internal lack and more about expressing a state that is already beginning to feel more complete. The night, in this context, becomes more than a period of rest. It becomes a field where the system rehearses a different way of being, not through deliberate visualization or structured intention, but through the gradual alignment of sensation, emotion, and underlying belief. When this alignment begins to take hold, even in small ways, the individual wakes into a slightly altered experience of reality. The same environment may be present, the same responsibilities, the same external conditions, but the internal response is no longer identical. Imagine standing in a room that has always felt confined. The walls have not moved, the structure has not changed, yet something within you begins to perceive more space than before. The difference is not in the room, but in the way your system relates to it. This is the nature of internal transformation. It does not always require immediate external change to begin reshaping the experience of life. As this quiet emergence continues, patterns that once seemed fixed begin to loosen. Reactions become less automatic, choices become less driven by habit, and there is a growing sense that new directions are possible, even if they are not yet fully defined. This does not eliminate uncertainty, but it changes the way uncertainty is held. Instead of being a source of tension, it becomes a space where something new can take form. Within this unfolding, prosperity is no longer approached as something distant or conditional. It begins to be experienced as a reflection of an internal state that is gradually stabilizing into coherence. And in that coherence, there is a subtle but powerful shift, one that moves away from striving and toward a quieter, more grounded openness to what can emerge. The return to an inner ground of prosperity. As this journey comes to a close, what begins to reveal itself is not a hidden technique or a formula to control outcomes, but a deeper recognition of how life is continuously shaped from within. Prosperity in this context is not something that appears suddenly in response to effort alone. It emerges from a gradual alignment between what is felt, what is believed, and what is allowed to take form in the quiet spaces where identity softens and reorganizes itself. Throughout the night, when the noise of the external world fades, there is an ongoing process that most never witness directly. Emotional patterns are reinforced or softened, internal narratives are either repeated or gently reshaped, and the body learns, in its own language, what it is safe to receive. This process does not respond to urgency, nor does it follow the demands of impatience. It responds to consistency, to coherence, and to the subtle willingness to experience life without constant resistance. In this way, abundance is no longer something pursued as a distant outcome. It becomes a reflection of an internal environment that is no longer dominated by contraction, anticipation, or silent fear. As the system begins to rest in a different state, one that does not need to prove, protect, or compensate, the relationship with possibility changes. Opportunities are no longer filtered through tension alone, and the experience of receiving becomes less unfamiliar. This is not about becoming someone else, but about allowing the deeper layers of who you are to reorganize in a way that supports expansion rather than limits it. And within that reorganization, something quiet yet profound takes place. Life begins to feel less like a struggle to force outcomes and more like a movement that unfolds from a place of inner stability and openness. Have you ever paused long enough to sense what your inner state is truly rehearsing every night, beyond what you consciously wish for? If this perspective resonates with something within you, consider staying connected to this space, because these conversations are not just ideas, they are invitations to a different way of experiencing your life. Subscribe to the channel and allow yourself to continue this journey by watching the next video appearing on your screen, where this exploration goes even deeper into the unseen patterns shaping your reality.